Hello, I'm joined today by my guest, Siân Hemming-Metcalfe from, well, I normally introduce you as being from inventory base, but today you are one of the candidates for President Elect at ARLA Propertymark. So congratulations for being one of those candidates, Siân. Obviously, we know each other from work, day-to-day life. So just in order to give the viewers at home a little bit of background, what I found most interesting about you was what came out in a conversation that we had around International Women's Day, where we were all talking about, all us girls were talking together about where we'd come from and what our first jobs have been. And your first job was very, very different to what it is today. And I think it's an interesting story because it's brought certain qualities through. So introduce yourself to the folks at home, but more importantly, if you could tell us just a little bit about how you got to be where you are today.
Yeah, sure. Obviously I'm Siân. I run my own inventory business, but I also work with inventory based training clerks and agents and throughout the industry. And I've been in this particular part of the industry, this sector of supplier status, as it were, for around about 10 years. But previous to that, I actually worked with the prison service for 21 years. And I worked my way up from an office clerk, filing reports and, fetching things all the way up to a governor grade. So I went all the way through the uniforms and worked my way up. I did my craft, as some people put it. I did my time on the landings. I think I spent about 10 years before I started going up the ranks through the uniform ranks before I got to governor grade. 21 years, it was brilliant whilst I was doing it, really enjoyed it, learned a huge amount about people, about life, about how to manage people, how to manage situations, as you can imagine. But I also learned a lot in regards to evidence collation. I worked with the HMRC, I worked with Her Majesty's Inspectorate, I worked with the courts, and I dealt with a lot with litigation as well. So my background in that kind of arena really has helped me in what I'm doing now in supply status in regards to compiling reports, doing risk assessments. But the reason I actually started doing that is because I was a landlord, had a really bad experience with an agent over an inventory report that didn't protect me, lost a lot of money, thought, I can do this better. So when I started my business, I've based it around what I understand as evidence, and that is a little bit more than maybe what most people would consider, purely because that's where my experience lies. I understand that I've been in a court of law, I've been in front of a judge having to explain not just a couple of £100 or £1,000, but millions of pounds worth of litigated issues and costs, etc. So I kind of employed that information in my business, utilised that experience to kind of build my business as a supplier to the industry. So I work with agents, I work with estate agents, work with letting agents, and have done over, said, for the past 10 years, and just gradually built my business up organically, learning along the way, learning about the industry, all its nuances, and just getting to real grips about the legislation. So hopefully now I've got a really good understanding of exactly how the industry works and also what it needs from us as suppliers.
And it's interesting because that first kind of job, I mean, maybe it's a stereotype, but you would assume it needs a certain kind of toughness, but both physical toughness, but also mental toughness, because let's face it, sometimes those are some of the most hostile environments you can ever expect to be in. But you learn a thing or two about human behavior and how to handle people along the way. Is that just all stereotype, or is that what you carry with you to this day?
When I first started, I wouldn't see boo to a goose. I'd go, I'm red-faced now, but that's just life at age. But I would struggle when if I come across a person who'd maybe been aggressive and didn't know how to handle them. But I learned that. I learned how to deal with those types of people, those types of issues. But what I also learned is that just because someone's angry doesn't necessarily mean they're angry at you. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're trying to be aggressive for aggressive sake. There could be underlying problems. So I look at things differently now. And I think that really does help me when it comes to dealing with clerks, dealing with staff, dealing with agents, dealing with tenants and landlords, because sometimes emotions run high and it's not always the case of what it looks like on the outside as to what actually the issues are behind it all. And sometimes, having this experience really does help de-escalate it, get people to kind of calm down slightly, which I never actually tell them to calm down because it's the worst word ever, because people then don't tend to go the exact opposite
Yeah.
way. But I learned how to manage that and manage, big groups of people. At one point I was, looking after a 1,600 bed prison with, anything up to 500 to 600 staff. So you've got to learn that everybody is different. You've got to be able to treat them differently, understand them and be able to manage them.
This is a lady that's been in tenant management one way or another for a long, long time now.
Yeah.
Siân, obviously I know the way that you run your business and the expertise that you have from the inventory clerk side of things. And one of the sort of subjects that we don't talk about enough is the divide sometimes in our industry between agents and suppliers. And in my opinion, and my opinion only, as agents, we're sometimes guilty of putting ourselves on a pedestal and thinking that we're the only ones that are setting the industry standards. We're the only ones that are promoting good practice. We're the only ones capable of truly taking our industry in the public eye to be where it needs to be. And I've learned at Kerfuffle over the past couple of years, having great conversations with a lot of suppliers, that you care as passionately, if not more passionately than we do. And you are part of that conversation and you're part of that effort. And I feel sorry for you guys because we sometimes treat you as second-class citizens, as a commodity, as somebody who's just trying to get our hard-earned buck. And it's not that way. The help and the assistance, we're all building an industry together. But why is it that some people feel incapable of making that leap? And why haven't we made more of an effort previously to kind of join it up?
Oh, I mean, that's a really big question. I mean, I think a lot of it is down to just the fact that everybody's busy doing their own thing and want to get the sale through, the lettings through. And in a way, suppliers are just facilitating that process. And it's never been really seen anything more than that. Certainly in my experience. I mean, I remember one of my first ever agents walking into, having a conversation, very pleasant, these are my services, this is what I want to do, when I first started out. And as I walked out, I watched my business card put into the bin. They didn't even wait till I got out the door before they did that, and it left a lasting impression, thinking this can't be right. This is not how I envisaged me building this business. And I don't necessarily think that they were dismissed by agents or even other suppliers, to be honest with you. I think it's just the fact that it said they're focusing on what they need to do, their sales funnel, their pipelines, and it's just a case of just trying to get all the different components together through the process. But when you look at it, every single part of the lettings, the estate agency process will require a supplier in some form or another all the way through, be that an inventory professional, be that an electrician, be that a cleaner, be that the use of a CRM, a tenant referencing. So the suppliers all the way through that process, lettings or tenancy, lettings or sales. But it's how, like you said, it's looked at. And I think sometimes people don't realise, or agents don't realise, the fact that those suppliers come with a huge amount of knowledge, a huge amount of experience. Yeah. And like you said, they're there because they care, they want to do a really good job, because that's how they're rated, that's how they're seen. If you do a bad job, you're not going to be there tomorrow. But if you do a good job, you will be there tomorrow. But then there's always a feeling that, you've always got to please, you've always got to do it right, you've always got to agree, you've always got to make sure that, you're doing everything for the client, but sometimes it doesn't always come back. And that's not necessarily the same for every single client. I've got brilliant clients. I class myself as very lucky. I've built some really good relationships with them over the years. They understand me, I understand them, and I'm not afraid to tell them if I don't think they're doing something right. Not because I'm the font of all knowledge, because I'm not. I'm learning, and I think I learn every single day.
Yeah.
But there are things that I do know that especially when it comes to legislation, when it comes to things around safety. So, you know, if I think something's not being done right, I think it could be improved, then I will tell them, I'll let them know. They can choose to take my advice or not, and that's the benefit of having advice. You can take it or leave it. You know, it's not an edict to do something or do it your way, but at least it gets put into the mix in regards to considerations and how things are done going forward. And I think suppliers in general do that a lot, but sometimes they don't even get recognized, or it's not kind of like seen. It's just someone telling you something, and you might then think about it later on, or you might do something about it later on. But if you actually listen to these suppliers, because they're doing the job in, day out, we've all got our own kind of like forms of legislation we have to deal with in regards to gas safety, electricians, you've got to be qualified, not so much on the infantry supplier side, but we're trying to change that. I mean, saying want to see is, better control over that, better standards, better training, and also more recognised qualifications, so that again, when you're hiring someone, you know what you're hiring, and you know that you're going to get a good quality service, all based on the fact that this person is a qualified professional, and that's what they are at the end of the day. And I think if they can be seen that way and talked to and worked with, as opposed to just seen as maybe bit of a commodity, something you've got to have, but or you've got to pay for, a bit like you said, that the amount of benefit an agent or letting agent will get out of it is actually vast, because everybody's got experiences. My experience, but do you know the experience of your cleaner? They might not have always been a cleaner. I know cleaners who are ex-policemen. I know cleaners who are ex-border force officers, but they've chosen a different pathway, they're running a different business for whatever reasons they have, but they've got this wealth of experience, but no one's actually asked them, no one's spent the time to actually get to know them.
I once had a psychologist who used to be an HMRC inspector, so you can do different things, and you can segue. But I do think that people's backgrounds, one way or another, and their life experiences are part of that kit bag that they have to draw on and to employ and deploy, throughout their professional career and their life, in terms of what they give themselves to and what they stand for. So I think there is a bit of importance to that, which is why when we're talking to the Propertymark candidates, what we'd like to do is sort of get to know a little bit about where they've come from. But given that conversation about sort of suppliers and agents, and the way that that's perhaps changing now, and I do see that changing more, because we are talking more, to give a bit of a shout out to somebody that we spoke about off camera, but Katie Griffith and Martin Baum, who run a fantastic podcast every Thursday morning, I think at 8:35, House of Property, is a great podcast. But what I love is that every now and again, Katie, in her own inimitable style, will make some suggestions. And when Katie makes the suggestions, they're not really suggestions, they're orders you must follow, because they're good. It's good tips. But one of the tips that she touched on a while ago is that, we take some time to thank our customers. We take time to thank our colleagues. Do we spend time to thank our suppliers? Are we sitting down with them and sort of getting to know them as people? And she highly recommended that people do that. And from the conversations I've had, I highly recommend it as well, because I think they're some of the most wonderful people you'll ever hope to meet. But their life experience and their professional experience can make all the difference. So in terms of Propertymark, how, and being more sort of in the supplier camp than the agent camp, the other candidates are obviously clearly in the agent camp. Is there a concern personally that perhaps we'll just end up voting for one of our own? Or do you think that people are ready to open their eyes and sort of see that we're actually all part of the same family?
Certainly for the reaction that I've been getting recently, I think people are much more open. I mean, of course, you will naturally, err towards the side of the person that, represents you most, that you feel more comfortable with, that you feel that could add value. And I want to be, that person. I'm here not because I want a title. I'm here because I actually see there's a need in the industry to have a more collaborative approach between the suppliers, between letting agents, and by doing this process, by putting myself forward, putting myself out there. Because funny enough, on my board, and someone said to me, what don't you like? I said, well, I hate being at the forefront. I'm much happier being at the background, churning the wheels, as it were. But in order to affect change, you've got to put yourself out there. You've got to make yourself uncomfortable. You've got to put yourself in an arena that maybe you wouldn't necessarily do, because, I'm passionate about it. We've got some great suppliers, great people, great agents. And I think we've got an opportunity now to kind of bring everybody together. If you think about it, we talk about letting agents, estate agents, commercial. We've also got auctioneers, we've got inventory suppliers, but you don't really see anything about them. But then again, you don't see anything about the actual supplier network at all. There's no one really representing them. There's no one actually shouting from their corner, but equally showing how we can all work together and get some benefits out of it. I mean, think we've got loads of changes coming. We've got repeal of Section 21. We've got fitness of human habitation from Wales coming in next month. Or July, but already started the process. There's loads of things that not just agents got to do, but suppliers have also got to help them do. But how do you know who's got the skill sets? How do you know if they can help you? Unless you, like you said, you sit down, you talk to them, find out what can they do, what do they know, how can that benefit each other? And it doesn't mean that's a one-way street, because every time I talk to an agent, I'll learn something about legislation, or I'll learn something about the industry, and equally I can then give them my take on it and make them think about things maybe in a different way, because I'm looking at it from a different way. So it gives a better way of understanding, the impacts, what can happen, how you can best affect your actual agents, and how you put that forward to your your tenants, your landlords, how you deal with them because of the knowledge you've gained from talking to all these other people. Because we're not independent. If I don't have an agent, I don't have a job, because I need them to give me work. Equally, if they don't have me, then they're not going to get a good enough report, and then that could cause them problems down the line when it comes to dispute resolution. So it's there's a relationship there that we should be nurturing and really taken advantage of, because like I said, those life skills, that information, that expertise is it's going wanting because it's sat there and no one's really using it.
So talking about expertise, we can't have a conversation about Propertymark without somebody mentioning ROPA at some point, somebody mentioning the fact that regulation in some form or another is expected to be with us within our lifetime. Let's not give it too much of an ambitious timeline, but it is expected to be with us at some point soon. And Propertymark seem to sort of hold the position that we welcome the chance for us as an industry to almost self-regulate. They obviously say that because they'd like to be part of that regulation process, and that makes a lot of sense in terms of the standing of the organization and the work that they already do. But hand in hand with all of that is obviously getting agents up to a certain standard so that they can hold those qualifications. And there's much said online about level 4 and how to achieve it now, and everybody's got a slightly different approach to it. What's your view of training and sort of getting to these sort of new levels?
I agree with, I train clerks and agents, so I agree with that. That's the best way to learn. But I think there needs to be a mixture of not just book learning, but actually putting it into practice, because it's like with inventory clerks, when you're doing training with them, you can give them the actual idea, the understanding, the structure, but it's putting it into practice. That's what matters, because you're going into the property, you're navigating, you're trying to figure out what you're seeing, trying to risk assess and deal with all that. So I think the ROPA idea is really good. I wasn't happy about the fact that as inventory professionals, we weren't really included unless we were a Saturday person. We weren't working for the agent, then we were included, which seemed a bit daft to me. But I thought, well, we need to start somewhere. Let's start somewhere and let's see where it goes there afterwards. But I think with the way we are at the moment, we've got ROPA. We don't really need, in a way, ROPA to be enforced on us. We can take that and run with it and start the training as it's already happening with Propertymark and other providers, so that we can learn and understand and put it into practice. But I think the key thing for me is you know, you've got these books, you've got these stats, you've got these legislation, great, lovely, but how do you put them into practice? What does it mean on the ground? I can remember getting standards and prison service instructions, you know, you've got to do this, you've got to do that, and so on and so forth. Well, great, lovely, but how do I actually do it? How do I put it into effect? How does it actually relate in the real world? And that's the kind of, like, in a way, the bit of the disconnect, because you might be able to tell me how to wire a plug, but if you can't physically do it, what's the point? You know, because I still need the plug wired. And it's that kind of example that you need when it comes to agents and suppliers, you know, knowing the legislation, understanding the process, but then working out, well, how do we actually
how to apply it? I think that's actually part of the learning process, is that if you're leaving out the actual hands-on doing side of a process, it's like teaching somebody to drive a car purely on the theoretical end of it. So yes, in theory, I will know what it's like to, when I approach a roundabout, where I have to be indicating. But until you're actually sat there with the pressures of all the traffic going round, and you've practiced it a few times, you don't know how you're going to respond. And it needs to get to the point where actually it becomes almost second nature, because you're employing it in your day-to-day job. So to sit there with a sort of a stack of these books, and to, which we've discussed this, I sometimes find that very daunting. And I don't think it's particularly, if our job as ARLA Propertymark representatives is to say, come on guys, get on board, learn as much as you can. Learning doesn't necessarily need to be a taxing process. It can also be fun. But if you're employing it in your day-to-day job, how much better can it get, really? It's practice made perfect.
It does, exactly. And I have this conversation every time I train. You know, we have a set process. We have things that we've got to cover. We've got things that we've got to talk about legislation wise, but then it's the actual practical application. And often the conversations will be about, well, how do I do this? I said, well, this is, you know, one way of doing it. This is another way. Get them to think about what it is that they're doing, why they're doing it. And that's the key thing. A lot of the stuff, certainly on our side of things from the supplier point of view, is, well, I've got to do A, B, and C, but then A, B, and C is not actually explained as to, well, why do I have to do A, B, and C? Would D not be better? Would that not make more sense? You know, and if it doesn't, why doesn't it make more sense? So I think you need structure, definitely, without a doubt. If we didn't have structure, we'd be all over the place and running around, not knowing what happens, and, you know, days gone and you haven't achieved anything. So you need that structure, you need that learning, and you need that book learning, because it says it gives you the ability to understand A to B to C, this is legislation, this is going to happen in section 21, section 8, this is what happens with fitness of human habitation. You've got carbon monoxide alarms and smoke alarm legislation changing. You need that so people understand it. And then it's in the case of, well, when do I need to do it? How do I need to do it? Why do I need to do it? And then who's going to do it for me? And then you then look to your supplier network and go, okay, well, who knows what? Who's the best person? And often that best person is the person that has gone and done all that learning already, but you just didn't know about it until you talk to them, which is why you then need to have that conversation. Like you said earlier, sit down, you know, meet them, you know, say, hi, you know, I'm Siân, this is me, you know, what would you like to know, and have a general conversation. And I did it all the way through the tenant fee ban. Often I was having corporate clients saying, can I do this? Can I do that? And I went, actually, no, you can't, because legislation states. And I would have thought that they would be better prepared, because they are from a big organisation. I would have thought, you know, that information would come down, and it did, but the application of it didn't necessarily come through at the same time, and that's what they were lacking. So I was able to put it into context. And if you look at your suppliers, 9 times out of 10, they can do that for you, but you just need to ask, you need to talk to them.
That's great. So if we were to look at say sort of ARLA and NAEA as it was back in those days before it was called Propertymark, and maybe even, we don't need to go back that far in history, we can go back sort of 10 years. It was an industry that was it was an industry champion, if you like, that wasn't necessarily as modern or as fit for purpose in those days as it perhaps is today. It felt like we sort of lost touch with people because we'd put ourselves on a pedestal, these professional qualifications that we perhaps had. Maybe we assumed they had too much significance to the public, and we weren't doing enough to demonstrate truly what the value is. There is a sense, though, very much that is changing, and I'm guessing, and you can tell us if that's true, that you might not have necessarily put yourself forward or even been considered, to be honest, for this position sort of 10 or 15 years ago, but now it kind of feels like the right time because there are things that are changing within the organization.
Yeah, no, definitely. Certainly since I joined, and I've been a member for about 10 years now. Certainly when I first joined, it was more of a case of a logo to sort of recognize that I was a part of an organization of something that did something that's meant something, and that's about as broad as it would get, you know, that as detailed as it would get. Whereas the last few years, that is a definite change. There's more inclusion, there's more going on, there's more information being shared, and certainly this is my second go of doing the board. I sat the board once and I didn't get through. I didn't expect to, but I'm more of a case of, well, let's have the experience, let's try, let's see how I go. And equally, there's no point in complaining about something unless you're willing to kind of get your hands dirty, get involved and put yourself forward, you know, and take yourself out of your comfort zone. But certainly this time around, I feel that I've got not a chance, but I'm heard, that people are listening to me, that I'm actually being considered because I actually got something to say as opposed to anything else. And I think certainly looking at the way the Propertymark board have, you know, they developed their strategy, they've developed their vision. It's very people-centric, very membership-centric. They're understanding that the members need to feel that they've got an organisation behind them that's got their back, that's there for them, that will help them. I don't necessarily feel that I get that on my side of the organisation, but I'm hoping that even just by being part of this process, being heard, that people will start to even think about suppliers in a different way and be more inclusive and start to utilise that knowledge base.
Got to be part of that conversation to make
Exactly.
it even to even put it on the agenda and get people to sort of listen to it. I think it's immensely important. I think we've got, as much to learn from each other on both sides of that industry. And I think you guys also need the structure and support that we as agents need.
Absolutely.
Uniform standards, inventories, my word, if you would have seen, I've got somewhere, one day when we sit down, I'll show you a rogues gallery of inventories I've collected over the years. But you'd be surprised at what kind of passes for an inventory, a full inventory in some agencies, and what passes in others. And I think there are completely different standards. And let's face it, it doesn't matter who your deposit's with. Their processes are mostly similar. They're judging things on a very similar scale. It would make sense for us to have some sort of universal version or standard that we can hold, inventories to, and we can make sure that they're fit for purpose, really. There's no point in, first of all, there's no point in not having one. You need to have one. You don't stand a chance of any kind of adjudication afterwards if you don't have one. But secondly, it needs to be decent, because you can't, I've seen stuff which is ridiculous. So I think it's so important.
It is. And the thing is, and it's an age-old kind of conversation piece in regards to the whole whose deposit is, i.e. the tenants. And that's hard-earned money. This isn't just a figure, it's a sum that sits in someone's account that is just, doesn't mean anything to anybody. Tenants, just, by the mere fact of, going into rental accommodation, it's expensive to do. That money that they are putting towards that deposit is, something that they've had to save up for. It's almost like a considered purchase. This isn't a throwaway amount that they can just walk away from and never worry about. It's important to them, so therefore it has to be protected, and that's why we've got the protection schemes. That's why we've got the deposit schemes. That's why they have the adjudicators, they have the processes. But for me, there's a disconnect in regards to the guidance, like you said, the standards, what we should be seeing every single report, regardless. For me, it's health and safety. It's about the key information, about the meter information, about the manuals and stuff like that, that helps a tenant manage a property, look after it, use the appliances, use them properly, use them safely more than anything else. So, that whole structure, to me, needs to be standardized. It's something we're doing, as part of my role with inventory base. But it needs to be a global thing, a UK-wide thing, that everybody has, the same kind of information, certainly from the point of view of safety, so that, again, the tenant is protected. And then, of course, then thereafter, the deposit is protected. Because at the end of the day, it's got to come back to them.
Yeah, but also customer experience comes into that. As a tenant or as a landlord, if I rent 5 properties right now and I take them from 5 different agents on the same street, I could have an entirely different process or entirely different experience with each one of them.
Yep.
That sounds ridiculous, doesn't it?
But it's not, but it's true. And I've been on both sides of that particular conversation in regards to being both a landlord, a tenant, a homeowner, so I understand it from all different angles. And the thing is, it's that relationship is important, because it's the trust that you get the good PR out that trust, because people review you, they say how great you are. If you're bad, everybody knows about it, but unfortunately when you're good, not many people do, so there's an imbalance there. But we need to look at it as more of a relationship, as opposed to you're a landlord, you're a tenant. Tenancy isn't a subclass. They're people, families, that they.
Well, that's very interesting, because that was going to be my next question to you. We, sometimes when we talk about Propertymark and legislation and what the logo stands for, and whether people can rely on that, we always talk about what it means to the landlord. We always talk about that the landlord can come along, they can take one glance at that ARLA logo, and they can just tell that this agent knows their stuff, is professional, and runs their business ethically according to a set of standards, and they can expect, you would assume, the gold standard of service as well at the same time. Now let's take that as a given. I wish it was, but let's just take that as a given. How important do you think it should be to a tenant, therefore, to come along and actually rent a property from an ARLA Propertymark qualified agent? Should that make a difference to a tenant?
Yeah, it should be equal. It should be just as important as it's a landlord as it is to the tenant. The tenant will want to know that person will represent them and look after them, keep them safe, keep their deposit safe, act in a professional manner, which the agents, your ARLA Propertymark agents do. But you have that confidence instilled there. But equally, also, it's about all the other services and processes that underpin that as well. It's not just that agent, that person that sat on that desk that you meet, that signs the ASTs, gives you your paperwork, takes you through tenant referencing. It's every part of that process, because if that bit of the process isn't correct and gold standard and to the best of that it can be, then that reflects on the agents. So you need it for everybody basically to be paying their part, being just as knowledgeable, being just as customer centric, trying to get to that gold standard all the way through that tenancy process, literally from the point when they walk through the door to the point they hand back the keys, and even a little bit afterwards with deposit disputes. So to me, that should be an expectation that everybody there is exactly the same, whether you're a landlord or whether you're a tenant. It shouldn't make any difference at all.
So we've spoken about why Propertymark perhaps is important for an agent. We've also covered the fact that it should be equally as important for suppliers. We've looked at that it's important to landlords and to tenants, and that's all great. And the next level is Propertymark, or should Propertymark be something that government truly cares about? And when I say truly cares about, government makes a lot of housing decisions. I mean, we're going through housing ministers at a rate of knots these days. We seem to have a new one every month. But in terms of housing policy and the changes to legislation that are brought in, particularly seems to come down into the letting sector and kind of just where you sit, if you like, in terms of where all the fun is. But it is, you know, some people feel that some of the decisions made by government have been unkind to the sector. They've been unkind to landlords in particular. We've not been a pleasant and welcoming business environment for landlords because costs and so on. But what we also know in that whole conversation that the press is having, and sometimes we lose track of that particular thread, and to me, it's that the private rented sector is going to have to take up the slack in terms of the public side rented sector, the stuff that's not being built, the council houses that aren't available, and the fact that as a population we're growing, we're not, certainly not shrinking. No. And we all need somewhere to live. We all need safe and habitable homes. We're all entitled to that as a basic entitlement. But God, if the story of the last 2 years isn't the fact that supply and demand, I mean, I could currently rent a tent in my garden. It doesn't necessarily mean that that is fit for purpose for every tenant, but I would have them queuing up because there's nothing else out there. And sometimes I feel that from an agent's point of view, government aren't hearing that message. They don't understand that we're perhaps the heroes waiting in the wings to really save them. We need their backing rather than them trying to rein us in the whole time and tie our hands. So to me, if I could invent the perfect superhero for the property industry, yes, it might be Propertymark man or woman who flies in and whispers gently in the ear of those in the seat of power in Parliament to say, come on, guys, get your act together, get with it. We're more important to you than you actually think. Where are you on that whole discussion, and how important do you think it is to government?
Well, it's extremely important. I mean, I can go back to some of my previous role where, you know, one of the stakeholders, you know, talking to government about legislation in regards to, you know, prisoner offending behaviour, and also, you know, the overall management and safety of. And I mean, at the end of the day, the government need to be looking at organisations like Propertymark because they have that expertise, they have that understanding. You know, the agents, the suppliers, we're all doing that job day in, day out. We know we're at the coalface, we're talking to people, we're understanding their pain points, we're understanding their worries, and that all needs to be fed up to government, because at the end of the day, government, just purely because of, you know, the size it is, what they've got to do, the complexities of what they've got to manage on a, you know, UK wide and world basis, you know, they can't do that on their own. They can't have one person sat at a desk making all these policies, not understanding it, because I know I've seen that happen, you know, in real time, where policy's been made and it has no resemblance at all to what it's like actually at the point where it needs to be implemented. You know, it's pointless. And so they need to listen to Propertymark. They need to listen to the likes of Timothy Douglas, to understand exactly what's going on in the industry, where the pain points are, what's happening in, like you said, in regards to the stock levels, the fact that we've got so many people on the ladder of housing and we're all stuck. You know, there's no property go to, there's no property coming available because no one's buying it, or everyone's exiting the industry because of some of the policies that the government has placed on landlords, which then affect agents in regards to how they manage their properties and, you know, all the restrictions that they're now putting on them. Don't get me wrong, there's been a lot of good reasons as to why they've done it, and I understand it because of the safety element and also because of the way, you know, some property management and agents have worked, but they seem to concentrate on the very, very small minority that are not doing a great job and ignoring everybody that's doing a bloody brilliant job. And there's, you know, we're talking 99.9% of the private rented sector are doing a fabulous job, but they just seem to focus on the ones that are rogue. And I understand that because I've seen some of the conditions in my actual, you know, in my own experience. I've walked into properties that I've seen how tenants have been made to live because a landlord hasn't looked after the property, because in one case, an agent hadn't managed it properly. Lucky enough, that agent is no longer in business, and that's great because, you know, that's another area that's been cut off. but certainly from a government point of view, they need to listen to Propertymark, to the industry experts, the people that are doing this job day in and day out, because they understand it and they've got workarounds, they've got ideas, they've got experience where they can say, if you did this, this is what will happen, but if you do this differently, this is what, you know, a good positive result that could be had out of it. And you only get that by experience, and you get that by listening to people. And I think in some respects the government do listen, and I know Propertymark are lobbying constantly, and it's starting to kind of come through, but equally there's a huge amount of more work to be done. And I think the fact that ROPE has been pushed back so far, despite the fact everyone going, yeah, we need this, we need to sort this out, and in a way the industry is saying, great, lovely, we'll do all this because we want to prove that we are the experts, we are caring, we are the people who are making a positive difference. And if you know, if it takes us doing these qualifications to prove that to you, then we'll do that. That's absolutely fine. You know, we'll jump over that or through that hoop. But then that's then been pushed to one side. So I think that's where we need to kind of get a grip of that side of things and say, well, okay, fine, if you're not going to do it, we'll just do it on our own. We'll get it sorted and we'll prove to you that we can do that whilst we're actually managing all the issues that are kind of coming up through the, you know, through the rental sector.
And in many ways, that's the story of what we do as agents. We sort of got our heads down, got on with it. We have to do it anyway. It's what the public want in terms of better standard of housing, but it makes our life easier. A better standard of housing is easier to manage. It is easier. A landlord that understands their obligations, not just in the true sense of you must do this because that's what the legislation is, but actually wants to provide good quality housing that is, you know, we could talk about affordable housing as well. That's another major issue. But you touched on something there, the most unlikely pin-up boy ever, but Timothy Douglas. If your thing is legislation, oh my word, he turns a lot of heads at Propertymark. But there is that very rich resource, isn't there, when it comes to legislation? When you're dealing with a Propertymark member, you can get, you know, you can rest assured that really they know their onions when it comes to legislation, and it's much harder. It's not a 10-point list of stuff you can just tick through. There are nuances, aren't there?
Yeah, exactly. And again, it comes down to interpretation. Like you said, you can have, you know, all these legislation and edicts and everything in bullet pointed and A, B, and C and so on and so forth. But how do you put it into real terms? And you know, I've met Timothy and I've spoken to Timothy quite a few occasions. You know, and he's brilliant what he does because he puts it into plain speak. He understands how what's been saying effectively in legislation, government saying one thing, but then he's understanding, well, how can we put it into practice? How can we actually showcase that to the membership, the organisation, and get that working? Because that's at the end of the day is what we need, isn't it? Is to be able to take that information and put it into practice and get it working for the right reasons in the right way. And you know, Timothy is, you know, is a brilliant person, but if you only have to look at Propertymark, you only have to go up to their offices at Warwick and understand exactly, you know, we're not talking just one person, we're talking a whole organisation. There's a whole there's a whole infrastructure behind that, headed by the board, by Nathan and all the other board members. And that's in a way one of the reasons why I applied for this particular role again, because I can see the changes, I can see the vision, I can see the 4 pillars of where they want to see all of that change come to fruition and how they're going to do it. And obviously it's a work in progress. No one can actually give you a finite kind of list of we're going to do A, B, and C, and then we're done. It's, you know, it's a constant reiteration, a constant changing landscape, but it's got the right people at the helm that from my point of view, that I can see the change. And certainly from when I started 10 years ago as an ARLA Propertymark member, I wouldn't recommend them at that time. I just wouldn't. And people would ask me and I said, well, I can't, because I just don't feel that way myself. I don't feel that I can, because I don't feel that they're representing me. But in the last year or two, I felt that change and I feel a bit more represented. There's a huge amount of body of work to be done, certainly from the supplier side. You know, they're doing really great work with the agents, with the commercial, with the auctioneers. Suppliers hopefully will come next, and you know, it's positive and it's nice to see that. And finally I feel able to say to people, no, actually, look, I think you need to look at this, you need to look at what's coming out from Propertymark, look at the standards, look how they're, you know, helping people and supporting people. And I think there's room there for us to be more involved. And one of the reasons I really like about it is the fact that they've done the regional representatives, that, you know, now starting to actually go somewhere and see someone, speak to them and find out what's going on. It's not just someone in front of a webinar or front of a stage going,
but proper active support that you can dip in and out of,
and learn from.
And you know what, one regional rep who I was talking to shared a bit of feedback that they'd had from members that had come about the difference that their relationship with the regional rep actually makes to them in practice. And we don't talk about it enough in our industry, but sometimes it can be a very lonely place. You are up against it, and you sometimes feel like there's nobody else out there that understands what you're going through. But I think that Propertymark, in that way, and particularly around the regional reps and the support that they offer their members locally, you've got somebody that kind of understands, because they've been there before. They know what you're going through, and it's tremendous. And I've seen firsthand from the feedback that was taken, the sort of huge difference. And all it can sometimes be is a bit of positive encouragement, a bit of advice, or somebody just saying, listen, we've all been there. Tomorrow's a new day. Wake up, try it again. Just don't give up because of one run-in that you've had, or whatever it may be. So it can make all the difference. It
does. And just having someone to use as a springboard, like you said, that listening in. I think I do on my side of things in regards to what I do with training with inventory base, with the customers, and just in general clerks right across the UK, regardless of whether they use inventory based software or not. It doesn't make any difference, because I know what it feels like to be at that door, to be in that property, having to manage the relationship between the agent, the landlord and the tenant, having to understand what legislation is coming through, how it impacts. And like you said, the day-to-day stuff, when you come across something that maybe is not pleasant, or you've had a really bad day, you know, things haven't gone right, you need someone to talk to, like you said, to be able to understand that. And I think, you know, that's certainly something the regional reps are doing for agents, and hopefully, you know, that will then start to filter down, you know, towards, you know, certainly the inventory side of ARLA Propertymark, and also this wider supplier industry. And from what I understand, you know, there are people, you know, from the supplier side now starting to attend those regional meetings, which is great. But obviously they need more. They need something during that regional meeting that will matter to them, that where they can learn, as well as not just what the agents are learning, but something that's, you know, more centered around what their needs are and how they can progress in their own part of the industry, and how that then feeds back into the sector, because that's what it's all about. You know, what we learn, we can feed in, and we learn back from agents as well.
I think it's so important. So Siân, thank you so much for giving your time. I think I've held you for long enough, but the votes are now open, so people can cast their vote even as we speak, but they're only open for a short while longer. When is it on till?
16th of June, I believe, is the last date. I think it might be 12 o'clock midnight. I'm not 100% sure, but no, it's the 16th. But yeah,
16th of June. So the very best of luck to you. It's great to have that fresh perspective, and a candidate that offers perhaps a true difference to some of the others out there. You're all great. You're all flying the same flag and pushing for the same standards, but to me it's truly refreshing that maybe we've got a different perspective there, and your background and your experience is key to that, particularly as it's so lettings focused. Your career has been sort of very almost narrowly focused on one particular sector, which is superb, because I think you get to sort of build that as an expertise. So it's great to hear that.
Thank you. No, so it definitely has given me a more rounded experience. And then, like I said, I'm learning every day. I don't know everything. I'm talking to agents every day, clerks every day, estate agents, you know, right the way across the board. And I'm looking what's going on. And that's what I always say to everybody that comes into this industry, be it from my side or from the agents. You know, look at the industry as a whole, learn, you know, get involved as much as you possibly can. Don't just look in your particular part of the sector, look at everybody else is doing, because it's amazing how much information, expertise is out there that you could take a little bit of, or actually will dovetail really nicely into what you're doing that you hadn't thought about. So you need to, you know, literally, you know, widen your gaze, widen your information sources, and really start talk to everybody. And that's something I hope, you know, certainly as we go forward with Propertymark, you know, part of their vision, the strategies that it will become more inclusive, and everybody starts to work together for the one key aim: raising standards, raising safety, making sure that the private rental sector, is fit for purpose.
Superb. Thank you so much. Thanks for your time. Thank you for your inspiration, and best of luck with it all. Let us know how you get on. We'll check in with you again later on. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Bye-bye.